Hey, welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter. I am bringing you Acts 6, Part 1 today. And in Part 1, we are talking about what it means to feed those who are unable to feed themselves. So stick with me, and I will see you in a minute. Hey, welcome to Bible 365. I am your host, Kathy Carter, and this channel is here to kind of merge Bible living with Bible literacy. So, we are going to be using the New Testament this year in order to understand what it's like to live as a follower of Christ. I have a link below in the description that I have a download that will bring you to a chronological Bible reading of the New Testament. So, what I want you to do is read every day and join me and hopefully some friends as we talk about what it means to live as a kingdom builder. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to Bible 365. Here we are in Acts 6. So if you've been with me from the beginning, Luke is the author of the book of Acts. It's the Acts of the Apostles. So the apostles are doing the work that Jesus called them to do when he was taken back up into sit at the right hand of the Lord. So, okay, in 6 it says, now at this time, so they had just been in jail, and they had come out of jail, and they were preaching to all these people, and I mean, people were coming to them in droves. Now I'm saying that, but still, it's a movement, right? But and it's a big movement in a teeny tiny area, but like overwhelmingly, it's still kind of a small movement, right? So we have a few thousand people at this time. Amazing, considering it was a short period of time, and Jesus was there for 3 years, and probably didn't bring as many people as these apostles would, but Jesus did predict that that was going to happen. And so now we see that all these guys are going out and they're all speaking and preaching and teaching, and they're teaching again. If I haven't made this clear, they're all teaching the Jewish nation. So they are in the nation of Israel, and they are speaking to the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, are there other people in there that are outside of the 12 tribes of Israel? Definitely. There were definitely people that came to the Lord that weren't of the 12 tribes, but it was a small amount. It wasn't as big as the nation of Israel. And the main function was for the nation of Israel. So all these people were coming. They were sort of like communally living with each other. They were loving, they were teaching, they were growing, they were sharing. Nobody had lack, nobody had want. Everybody shared everything, right? So this is like, and this is what you kind of see in the beginning of a lot of movements. Like you see this like beauty, like sprouting up where people are sort of like lovely to each other, and then reality sets in, and you see less and less and less of that, and we're going to see that as we sort of move on into some of the historical church kind of stuff. But right now we're still in this like blossoming movement. It said at this time, while the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint came against these two groups of Jewish people. Now, again, these were followers of Christ. So this was like the group of Christ, what one would call the disciples of Christ. And they were all coming together and living together. And like this dispute came because we're all different. And we separate in the most narrow of ways. So if it isn't an obvious way, like skin color, it might be like I'm white, and so if I'm not gonna separate, maybe necessarily, like say I'm around tons and tons of white people, I'm likely gonna separate based on my genetic history. So Irish versus German versus Polish versus, right. So like we find the smallest ways to separate. Certain age categories separate from each other. Certain people who listen to certain types of music separate from each other. So this is what we sort of glorify in doing in a really sinful way, is separating from each other. So we have these two groups, right? Separate groups, equal in all things as they're supposed to be, but they're separate. One is like a more of a native Jew, native Hebrew, and the other is a Hellenistic Jew. I'm not going to go into what they are because that's not the point of this right now. The point of this is that they are separated. And in their separation, they notice that the widows in the Hellenistic Jews aren't getting fed in the same way that the widows of the native Hebrews are. That's probably happening because that's what happens in real life, right? We are extremely imperfect people. And so the first thing I want to recognize that is really important, and like really, I keep thinking it has to do with age, but I definitely think it has much more to do with faith than with age, that there's always going to be difference among us. There's always going to be sin among us. There's always going to be inadvertent sin among us. So like sometimes it's sin that we don't even realize, right? Like, so for example, if you were a native Hebrew and you had extra food, maybe you gave to them because you were around them all the time, or those are the people that you know, or those are the families of the families of the friends of the families that you know. So sometimes it can be inadvertent, sometimes it can be deliberate. So we need to be really cautious into knowing which those are. But sometimes it can be inadvertent. And so again, if we're told that, like, hey, this is going on, we need to look at it, define it, recognize it, and work on fixing it, work on making it better. Because quite often what we like to do is be like, that's not happening, or it doesn't really matter that much. When the reality is that it's hurting other people. Sometimes, by the way, it's not true, but in this instance, we're going to say that it is true. I'm just going to go with the fact that it's probably true that they were feeding the native Hebrew widow over feeding the Hellenistic. So now, what comes from that is that, like, so there's groups of people doing groups of things, and the apostles were like, this is what we need to do. We are doing the job that we need to do. We are praying, preaching, teaching, right? Like, we are the ones that lived with Jesus. We are the ones that heard all of his messages, and we are the ones that need to go out and tell the truth of what we saw. We were witnesses of every single thing that happened. And so we need to share that with people as a witness, right? So, like, I'm not saying what I'm doing is less than, because it's all I've been given, right? If a witness was here, a witness, as I've talked about before, a primary source, right, would be better than me, right? So someone who lived in and around the situation would certainly have a better vantage point than I would, because I haven't lived inside the situation. So that's what they were doing. So I just wanted to be clear, and because I know this can possibly be read like, we don't really have time to go feed people. Like, you go feed people. We don't have time to go feed people. But I think if we look at it from a different perspective, or like a different vantage point, we can see that we all have strengths and weaknesses. And so what they were saying is we need to find someone who can do this, and who can do this really, really well. And so what they did is they looked for not people that were good at cooking, not people that had served for a certain amount of time. They looked for people who loved the Lord, who understood the truth, and they created a team with that. So whenever we create a team, so if we go an example in a lot of the churches that we're in, right, we have a worship team, we have a serving team, we have a admin team, we have a children's ministry team, and there can be, any number of all of these other things in between. First and foremost shouldn't be their ability to do the job. First and foremost should be, do they know Jesus? Particularly over this past year, whatever, few months since I started Bible 365, I've been particularly interested in the idea that we should not be speaking of Jesus until we know Jesus. We shouldn't be taking advice from people who don't know Jesus. We shouldn't be following the things that people who don't know Jesus tell us to follow. We need to know Jesus. And biblical literacy, obviously, is a huge portion of it, which is why I'm so passionate about doing this podcast, because we need to know him in order to follow him. In order to teach others, we need to know him. You don't want someone teaching you calculus who doesn't understand their times tables. That would just be completely ridiculous. You don't want someone teaching calculus who only knows their timetables. Well, the reality is 4 plus 4, or 4 times 4 is 16, right? Like, okay, great, but how do I put that in an equation and find the volume of what's going on in this container if I don't know anything beyond that? We must be deep lovers of Jesus, right? Like, an understanding of who Jesus is, why Jesus came, how he died, how he came back again, and the ultimate purpose for what that was. Why do we speak to other people? Or is it about being nice? Is it about being forgiving? Those things are great after effects, but that's not why we do it. So we need to understand that. That was the most important thing that Stephen needed to do. Stephen needed to know the Lord. So it was Stephen and then a group of 7, which, again, like, the idea of a group of 7, of course, is extremely important, because here we go with this number of completion. Was it actually 7 men? It seems to be exactly 7 men that had to do this work of of putting together, right, the way that the community is going to work. So now I'm going to go into that, like, there is some kind of order. There is and I'm starting to become someone who thinks that the way that we do church right now isn't the right way. It's not really the book of Acts way they should be doing church. But in the same regard, there is system and there is order. It doesn't look like the Jewish temple, which is kind of like what we look like right now, like all churches. I don't mean certain churches or certain denominations. All churches seem to look like the temple right now. And I don't think we're supposed to look like that. However, there should be some kind of order in a community. So say they would get together and they would learn and grow together. And then they would have these community things that they would do where they would feed and they would clothe and they would house and they would work together, right? Like all of these other outside of the teeny tiny community, they would then work in the bigger community. And so they were supposed to be, because widows wouldn't live inside this like one community house with everybody, right? Like they would live maybe with their family, or they would live maybe in a group of widows would live together in a house, and others would be responsible for feeding them. So they put together this team in order to be able to go out and feed them. The primary purpose was to serve others, right? And this very particularly was to serve the widows of all, because that's what we're called to do. We're called to serve the disenfranchised. Now, right now, a widow might not be a disenfranchised, right? This would be the one that cannot help themselves. So in this community, and like, because things are a little bit different now, right? In this community, the widow, which I feel like I've mentioned a whole bunch of times, but if you haven't heard any of my other videos, the widow was one, likely if she was older and she was a widow, she may or may not have had children, right? Or her children may or may not be able to take care of her. She is not in a position where she's able to work and feed herself. She's an older woman, right? So I don't want to say has no value, because she certainly has value, but feeding herself isn't one of those things that she is easily able to do, right? She was taking care of her children, taking care of her grandchildren. Like that was some of the things that she did. And then her husband died. And now she's the husband who did hold a position of some kind of power and brought in money to feed them. She's no longer in that position where she's able to do that. So I'm sure she can do some things, but she can't fully, completely take care of herself. So others are there to do the thing that she is unable, not unwilling, but unable to do. Those are the things that we are called to do. We, as loving, honorable lovers of Christ, are called to help those who are unable to help themselves. And honestly, we're first called to the Christian. We are first called because they were feeding not the widows of the outside world, but they were feeding the widows of the people in their community, right? They were feeding the Jewish widows, whatever team of Jewish widow there was. That's the ones they were feeding. This is our call. Our call is to help bless the disenfranchised in our community first. And then we branch out into other, right? Like into other areas in order to have the call of the Lord or whatever it might be. But scripture to me, I feel like makes it very, very clear that our call is to our fellow lover of Christ. And I think that is, I feel in some ways that's really lacking, especially in some of our churches and our communities. Like we might not even have a lot of disenfranchised inside our churches. Or we might be like, well, we've taught them how to, pay their bills. I can't figure out why they still can't pay their bills. Maybe they're still a disenfranchised, and that's something that we need to continue for the rest of their lives to take care of. So it's something that we need to be wise about, right? Like we need to be in prayer about, we need to be fasting about. And that's why there are teams for this, not teams to withhold, right? Because I've actually been in churches where they have teams to withhold certain finances from certain people, but teams to really love on other people when they are in need and recognizing that they are in need. And you can only recognize that by being in communion with the Lord. So this all goes back to, do I know Jesus or don't I know Jesus? So listen, that's where I'm going to end today, because I do have some other things that I want to talk about in this chapter, and I'm already at 14 minutes. So I really want to end today with that. And so if you found this to be a blessing, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And I want you to keep reading chapter 6, and I will see you guys in the next video.